Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Zinat Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics. We are so pleased to welcome you to a discussion this evening with former Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey. Welcome, Governor. Before one of our students formally introduces the governor in a few minutes, I'd like to mention an upcoming event we have at the Institute of Politics and go over some housekeeping notes. Tomorrow, Friday, November 19th at noon, I will moderate a panel discussion regarding the rising role of the Asian American community and the increase in hate crimes to the AAPI community in our nation's politics. After the moderated discussion today, this evening, which will be led by David Axelrod, we'll take questions from you in the audience. So you could please line up behind the microphone to ask your question. Everyone is welcome to the microphone, and we will give preference to student questions first, as we normally do. This would be a great time to silence your cell phones. And we're now going to hear formal introductions of our speakers from Seth Cohen. Seth is a second-year student in the college who's majoring in economics and minoring in molecular engineering technology. Seth serves in the United States Marine Corps. Seth served in the U.S. Marine Corps prior to enrolling at the University of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Seth to the podium.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here today and attending this IOP Speaker Series event. As Enoch said, my name is Seth Cohen, and I have the honor today of introducing Mr. Chris Christie, the 55th Governor of New Jersey and a 2016 Republican presidential candidate. I was deeply hoping that my first ever vote for president would have gone to him. In 2001, the former President George W. Bush appointed Mr. Christie as the U.S. Attorney to the state of New Jersey. During his tenure, Mr. Christie put public corruption front and center, convicting or receiving guilty pleas from 130 public officials, both Democrats and Republicans. In 2010, Mr. Christie was sworn in as the 55th Governor of New Jersey, in which he prioritized fiscal reform, public health, and education. Additionally, during his tenure as governor, Hurricane Sandy struck New Jersey in 2012. Over 2 million households in the state lost power, 346,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and 37 New Jerseyans lost their lives. During this time, Mr. Christie showed the country what true and powerful leadership looks like, which included throwing away partisanship for the betterment of his fellow citizens. In March 2017, former President Trump appointed Mr. Christie to chair his Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission, in which he worked diligently to bring national attention to what he described as the worst epidemic we've ever faced. Moderating today's discussion is IOP Director David Axelrod, who worked for former President Obama as senior advisor to the president from 2008 to 2011 and senior strategist for his 2012 re-election campaign. Please join me in welcoming Governor Christie and David Axelrod.
Thanks, Seth. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for your service as well. Governor, welcome back to the Institute of Politics.
Happy to be back, David.
And the Axe Files.
Yes.
Good to be with you again. So here's this book, Republican Rescue, Saving the Party from Truth Deniers, Conspiracy Theorists, and the Dangerous Policies of Joe Biden. You're on a national tour. You can barely turn on the TV without seeing you.
Good, I'm doing my job.
I think you're up to something.
No, not me, David.
Tell me, one thing that interests me is, I don't know, when did you turn this manuscript in?
Went finally in late August.
Late August. So then comes November, the election in Virginia, the election in New Jersey, which was closer than anticipated, and all over the country. Pretty good Republican day. Right now, if you went to Vegas, and I'm no shill for the Republican Party, but if you went to Vegas, you'd get pretty good odds that the Republicans would, they're going to be successful, according to the odds makers right now. 22, maybe 24. So do you get it? Anybody come up to you and say, hey, thanks, pal, but we don't need rescuing?
No, the interesting thing is that even despite all what you just mentioned, Republicans that I talk to know that they do. Look, we lost between 2018 and 2020, the House, the Senate, and the White House. The only other time that happened in the history of the Republican Party in 2 years was 1930 to 1932 with Herbert Hoover. And then Democrats kept the White House for 28 of the next 36 years. So I think we understand that we've got some challenges. If you look at the voting pattern of what happened in 18 and 20, a lot of suburban educated voters who had voted for us, at least in some significant numbers, abandoned us almost completely. I'll tell you, just in my state, we went from 2016, we have 12 members of the House. It was 7-5 Democrat. After the 2018 election, it was 11-1. And we lost seats in places that we hadn't lost those seats in decades. So I think we know that despite the fact that we had a good night in 21, it's a long way till 22. Democrats have the White House and both houses of Congress, and they can do a lot to try to improve their lot. And we just kind of have to play reaction to them in some respects. So I think there's still a lot of jump balls to happen. I agree with you. The odds are that we retake the House at least, but you know, it's not going to solve our presidential problem. And I think we have a presidential problem, and we got to get to dealing with it.
Well, let's not talk in euphemisms. What happened in 2018 and 2020 that you fear could happen again in 2024?
Well, look, if
Does it have red hair?
I don't know if it's really red.
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. It's in the natural color index. But.
No, look. Donald Trump won in 2016 in a race that, to me, was extraordinary because you had probably the two most unpopular major presidential candidates on election day that we've had in my lifetime. And you know, I remember telling Donald Trump, Valentine's Day of 2017, he was in the White House for about 3 weeks. And I went there for lunch with my wife.
That's how you spend Valentine's Day?
You know, David, when the president invites you, you go, but it was only lunch, so I got to take Mary Pat out to dinner in Washington, so it worked out okay. But I remember telling him that day, look, recognize that you didn't win this election, Hillary Clinton lost it. And that's okay, because you're still sitting here. But the next 4 years, this is going to be about you 4 years from now if you run for re-election. And, you know, he never took that in or accepted it.
Does that sound bad to him that it's all going to be about you?
No, what sounded bad to him was that he didn't win, Hillary Clinton lost.
Oh, I see.
And then
I could see that, yeah.
That's it. But I said to him, look, and you know this because you were an interested observer in this in 2009 when I ran for governor. I've always said to people, I didn't win in 2009. John Corzine lost. And I was the seemingly reasonable guy on the ballot that wasn't John Corzine. Sometimes that happens in politics, and that's okay. I still got sworn in. I got to, you know, be in the governor's mansion. I got to be at the State House. I got to be governor. But I knew that the next 4 years, when that next election came, it was going to be about me, and I needed to build a record that was something worthy of supporting. And that was my point to Donald Trump. I don't think he's ever completely understood that, and he always is looking for the vendetta, for the grievance that he wants to either shine a light on or remedy himself, for himself. And I don't think that that's a winning formula for the party, to be looking backwards, to be exacting vendettas against people who didn't support you in the party, to be continuing to say that the election was stolen in 2020 when it wasn't. And so I think that's the problem for us. And the way to remedy it is for the party to start speaking out in that way. And someone needed to do it first. So, you know, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are out there early and first on saying that the election wasn't stolen. But I don't think they've gotten to the next stage, which is, all right, now what do we do? And that's what this book is about and what I'm trying to do. And look, as you know, I was an early supporter of Trump after I dropped out of the race. So it's not like I can be dismissed as a never Trumper. And I think that's important too.
No, I want to talk about that downstream.
Yep.
But before we leave Cheney and Kinzinger, they have been outspoken on this. They pretty much eat alone in the House Republican caucus. They've been shunned. And the view that you articulate at great length here in this book about what happened in the election has not been embraced by a majority of Republicans. In fact, the numbers have grown in terms of Republicans who now believe that there was something wrong with the last election, that perhaps the result was not proper. So why is that? And you're kind of betting that people are going to move away from Trump. He's sitting there in the 80s among Republicans. And I had a pollster tell me that any Republican who runs in 2022 who doesn't at least pay passing tribute to the notion that the last election was crooked is not going to win a primary.
Look, I can tell you that at least in New Jersey and Virginia, that turned out not to be true. I mean, Jack Ciattarelli, who is the Republican nominee for governor of New Jersey, was not somebody who expounded on the fact that the election
Didn't
was stolen.
expound on it, but didn't make a big effort to.
Well, it's two different things. Like I think what you said, the pollster said, was that they have to pay some passing respect to the.
And I think that both guys did, including Youngkin.
Well, look, I think Youngkin came closer to it than Ciattarelli did, but
I honestly didn't watch the Jersey race as closely as I obviously
see.
should.
Everybody got fooled. I kept telling people, look at the Jersey race. It's actually going to be close. But look, I think that there's another set of dynamic that's starting to happen here as well. Des Moines Register poll from a couple of days ago of Iowa Republicans, pretty conservative Republicans. The question was, who's your first loyalty to, the Republican Party or Donald Trump? 62% said the Republican Party, 26% said Donald Trump. I think a year ago that number would have been much different. And so what
Somebody should have shown Senator Grassley that poll.
Well, look, I think that I don't disagree with you. And I think that, you know this, a lot of people in Congress work out of fear. They operate out of fear. They make political judgments out of fear because they want to keep their titles. And so, I think that people, once they're given some cover, are going to show some courage. But they're not going to show courage without cover. And what this book is meant to do is to give people cover. That if I can say it and live, and so far, still here.
Maybe I should move my chair.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too close. But if I can do it and live, then they can too. So I think that's the way we have to look at it. And plus, remember something, he dominated every bit of political oxygen in this country for 5 years. He hasn't been out of office 10 months yet. So we can't expect that the world's going to change that quickly. It almost never does.
You talk about the House and their fears. It's been pretty, I mentioned it earlier relative to Cheney and Kinzinger, but we just saw a vote on an infrastructure bill. It got 19 Republican votes in the Senate, including the Senate Republican leader McConnell, came to the House. 13 Republicans voted for it. And some of them, and they were chastised by members of their own caucus. Congressman Gates said they were essentially abetting socialism. And Marjorie Taylor Greene couldn't sit for that and said, no, it's communism.
He picked out two winners for sure, to quote.
But yeah, well,
two of our brighter lights.
no, but the reality is that the whole caucus was cool to the people who voted for it, and they started getting death threats. Fred Upton from Michigan played a tape that was really shocking, even by, you guys in Jersey have heard some rough language.
Every once in a while.
Yeah. But maybe even used it, I don't know. But
you do know.
being polite. But over roads and bridges. You mentioned when we were saying, you were asked the other day if you would have voted for that bill. You said you would have.
I would have. I would have voted for the bill because I thought there was more good than bad. And that's what compromise is. In our government, if you're going to compromise on things, you're not going to get, by definition, you're not getting everything you want, or everything is not the way you'd like to see it. Some things are in that you wouldn't want in. Some things are out that you would want in. But if there's, in your mind, more good than bad, then I think that's something you should support. The one nuance I'll say about that vote was that I think a lot of Republicans were angry about it from a strategic perspective. That if Nancy Pelosi had had the number of votes she needed within the Democratic caucus to pass it, and then those Republicans had voted to add on, I think there would have been a lot less Republican pushback. The idea was she couldn't control her caucus. She lost the number of votes that got her below 218. And the allegation against those folks are, you saved her. You saved her, you gave Biden a win. You shouldn't have done that strategically. I think it was less about the substance with many of them
No, I
than
understand
it was about that strategy.
Isn't that the critique that a lot of everyday Americans have about Washington, is that it's more about whether the red team is winning or the blue team is winning, and not about whether they're winning?
And that's why I would have voted yes. But what I'm trying to explain to these folks is my perspective is that it was less about roads and bridges for many of them.
No.
Now, Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they probably didn't even know what it was about, but they knew they're against it. But I think for a lot of the Republicans, it was that Nancy Pelosi had not done her job of keeping her caucus together, and in the House in particular, you know, if you've got the majority, you've got the obligation to bring the votes forward to pass something if it's something you really want. So I think there was a strategic argument. I'm not excusing death threats or excusing the people who
That
are...
would be unwise. I'd advise you against that.
Yeah, who are ostracizing other Republicans. Because two of those Republicans of the 13 were from my state.
Yes, I know.
Jeff Van Drew and Chris Smith, who are both two very, good members of Congress in my view. And my guess is that this in the end won't cost them their seats. But I think that it's part of the problem with the entire Washington, D.C. scene right now. And it's been that way for a while. Is you're right, everybody's got their jerseys on and they don't want to ever seen to be cavorting with the other side.
You know, you wrote in your book about the fact that Trump may have capitalized on the environment, but he didn't create the environment, and you said something was happening already just below the surface of American politics and would continue to build a new kind of extremism, a political expression of personal frustration, bitter, angry, rooted in legitimate grievance, but often thoroughly unhinged. The 21st century extremism was fueled by cable television, talk, radio, propaganda, blog sites, and a new but growing force called social media, where no rules seem to apply, and one could say anything and it just might go viral. I agree with every word of that. But then later in the book you discuss social media, and your main complaint was that the social media companies excluded Donald Trump, kicked him off, and there were other bad guys in the world, the Ayatollah and others who were meritorious of being kicked off too, or whatever. I don't want to have that discussion.
Right.
I just want to stipulate your point. But isn't there a larger concern about these social media companies?
Yeah.
And it relates to politics. They profit when people stay online. That's their business model. And it turns out that it's easy to keep people online when they're angry, when they're fearful, when they have their own resentments. And so these algorithms send you to these corners. Mm-hmm. That's how we get to QAnon and so on. But so there's profit in division. There's profit in anger. Isn't that true in politics as well? Isn't that what Trump proved?
It has become that. There's no doubt. And let me say too about the social media companies that my concern about them is even larger because, we talk about Section 230 in there that shields them from liability.
Yeah. That's a provision in the communications law that treats them not as publishers, so therefore not liable. But we know that they curate materials.
That's my point. Is that I think the even larger problem, and it's I think agreeing with your point that they are now no longer. They analogize themselves to bulletin boards. They said like if you put a bulletin board up, the bulletin board owner shouldn't be sued for what someone tacks on the bulletin board.
But they decide what's on the bulletin board.
That's right. And in the beginning, the impression was that they did not. And what we now know about Facebook and Twitter and a number of the other social media companies is that they do. And that they do it in large measure to drive profit. And so, my concern about social media is, I used the example of Trump being kicked off and the Ayatollah Khomeini is still on. I thought, I don't know, he's a pretty bad guy too. Maybe he shouldn't be allowed to be.
There are plenty more. I can think of a lot of people.
A lot of them that are spewing hate on there and divisive stuff that maybe don't belong on there. But to me, the bigger problem is that they are acting as editors of where we go and what we see, yet they're not going to be held responsible for their judgments.
No, I get that point. I just think the bigger problem is their business model relies on driving people. How does QAnon, which you rightly report, is a completely crackpot cult.
Total.
And I apologize to any QAnon supporters in the audience, but how did it grow from, this germ of craziness into a movement where now there are a couple of members of Congress who are basically QAnon people,
Yeah.
and a resistance on the part of people, frankly, in your party, in a lot of cases, to take them on.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's why I don't mince words about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's probably the most prominent QAnon person in the House. I don't mince any words about what I think about her and how destructive I think she is to our political environment right now. And the fact that she gets more and more attention is not good for politics in this country. And I think that other people in my party, some have spoken out against individual things that she has said, but I think there's a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is, it's this tension, right? I don't think somebody like her belongs in the House. But then again, I don't get to decide that. The people of her district get to decide that. And so we have this conflict of, do we have the right as leaders in the House of Representatives to exclude someone who the voters have put there? Knowingly put there, because she didn't run like hiding it.
No.
She ran waving the flag.
Yes.
The QAnon flag, and they voted for her anyway. So I think there's a lot of interesting things going on right now in our politics that create all different kinds of conflicts, David. And to me, it seems pretty simple that she doesn't belong there, but the remedy is much harder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the real issue is, how do people come to their views and how they're getting information that
Yep.
would lead them to her. So, I mean, I think, but here's where I was going. And let me preface this by saying, we're friends.
Uh-oh.
So, yeah.
We are.
I only said that to ruin your political career.
Thank you. You've done it before, you can do it again, David.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we should point that out. I mean, I said earlier when we were speaking before we came out, you were the canary in the coal mine, because you, in the midst of the superstorm in Sandy in 2012, in the final week of the election, struck New Jersey. New Jersey was devastated. President Obama came up to New Jersey, and you greeted him, and you didn't punch him in the face. You didn't.
I didn't wear my Romney sweatshirt.
You didn't do any of that, and you did what I think was appropriate, which is the governor of the state. You toured the state with with the president, and you. I know from my own experience with him at that time that you guys were in close contact about what New Jersey needed.
Yep.
And so on. This was considered an act of betrayal by a lot of Republicans, and you heard about it when you ran for president everywhere you went.
Yeah, and I heard about it before. I mean, look, Barack Obama came on that Wednesday. Superstorm Sandy happened on a Monday, 8 days before the general election in 2012. Barack Obama came on Wednesday. By Friday, I was getting calls from Republican donors from all over the country saying to me, you need to go out there and remind people that you're for Romney. I'm like, well, what do they need to be reminded for? I was the keynote speaker at his convention. I raised more money for him than any other person whose last name wasn't Romney raised for him. And so why do I need to remind them? And finally, one guy said, if you don't do it, I will never support you again. And I had just come from a flooded basement apartment in Sayreville, New Jersey, where a person had died. And I said to this guy, all right, we can continue this discussion later, because right now I'm still pulling dead bodies out of buildings. And as long as I'm doing that, I don't really give a damn about what your concerns are about how clear I've been about supporting Mitt Romney.
That's a conversation stopper.
Yeah, that's it. And to make sure it was stopped, I hung up after that. But and I don't know if David knows this story, but about an interaction between President Obama that day and I. But we were touring in a town called Brigantine, which is outside of Atlantic City. And we held a press availability there. And I said some nice things about President Obama, all of which were deserved. I said, he's been there from the beginning. Every time I've called, he's taken my call. And everything we've asked for, he's given us. And I want to thank the president on behalf of the people of New Jersey for being so responsive. Those were all absolutely true statements, and he deserved to have them said about him because he performed his job. But we then got into Marine One together to fly up the coast so he could view the coast. And it was a little bit awkward because I'd said these very nice things about him. I had been Romney's keynote speaker, and God knows the awful things I'd said about Barack Obama during the campaign, but there were plenty.
I actually have a list.
Yeah, I remember a few of them. And so we're sitting, and as Dave will tell you, in Marine One, if you're sitting across from the president, it's very narrow, and you're almost knee to knee with each other. So we're sitting across, and we sit down, and we're waiting for the helicopter to take off. And the president looks at me and says, Chris, look, I just want to say, you said some very nice things about me out there. You didn't have to do that, and I appreciate it. I appreciate you acknowledging my work and the work of our folks over the last few days. It's very nice of you. And I said, Mr. President, I said what you deserved, and I'm happy to say it. And then there's this awkward silence between us, because where do you go from there? We're political adversaries, you know, and like here we are. And I looked at him, I go, you know I'm not voting for you, right? And he said, I didn't have any hope of that. And I said, good, all right, I just wanted to be, because there was this moment where we had been so nice with each other, and I'm like, I hope I'm not giving him the, you know, like I don't want to be a tease. I'm not voting for you. And he said, nah, he had no hope of that. So it was one.
We were comfortable about New Jersey.
Yeah, they were not worried about my vote. He won by 17 on election night in New Jersey. But I think the important point about this is that I never thought about doing it any other way. You're the governor of your state. You have an obligation to the people who voted for you and the people who didn't vote for you to do your job. And if I had done anything other than welcome to the president, greeted him, toured with him, showed him where I thought the problems were, and complimented him about the things that he had done well, then I would have been putting politics ahead of my obligations to people in my state who were suffering. And you can't ever do that. And so I can't tell you how many people ask me in the 9 years since then, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it differently? And my answer every time is the same, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have done one thing differently because it was the right thing to do. And I know what it cost me. And in the end, I heard much more about that than I heard about almost anything else when I was running for president.
And I'm not taking anything away from it, because I thought it was a really important thing to do at that time, not for Barack Obama, but for the country to see two people of different parties working together in a disaster. It didn't hurt you in Jersey.
Oh, it was fabulous for me in New Jersey.
Yeah.
You know, in New Jersey, Barack Obama won by 17 points, and I was being nice to him. So yeah.
I mean, but it's interesting because Jersey, you're in a state that leans Democratic. You were the Republican governor in a state that leans Democratic. Part of the problem we have in this country is that so many people come from states that are so homogenous
you couldn't elect
politically
somebody from that party,
that there is no, you know, and that's almost, you know, I would say, you know, 90% of the congressional districts.
Yep.
You never have to have a general election. One of the reasons Barack Obama was successful as a politician nationally was that he campaigned in downstate Illinois. It helped him when he went to Iowa, very familiar to him. Yep. He had been in the state legislature here and had worked with Republicans from all over. And he had a feel for, you know, there was, he was well trained in that. There aren't that many places where that happens anymore.
No, I agree with you.
But
no doubt.
So I want to. But I just want to push you a little bit on one thing, because this book is divided.
End of the kumbaya moment, everybody.
Yeah. Now,
buddy.
This book is divided into three parts. The first chronicles your relationship with Trump, particularly through the Trump years. We'll get to an aspect of that. The second is debunking crazy conspiracy theories, which notably you point out Trump was a purveyor of many of them. The third, though, is this kind of certification for, I mean, I think you would say it's a blueprint for Republicans, but it's also a certification that after, you know, dumping all over Trump, you actually are a Republican. And some of the language in it, I just like, let me read this from the policing section. the crime section. Not only do we have everyday crime rising, but the summer of 2020 gave us rioting and looting of the Black Lives Matter protests. Democrats did not just support the peaceful protesters, they openly supported rioters burning our cities and looters destroying small businesses. They urged defunding of police and, worse, demoralized police officers all across the country. Crime is out of control under Democratic influence and Joe Biden's leadership.
You disagree with that?
Well, yes, because I never heard Joe Biden once say that he believed in defunding police. In fact, he emphatically took the other position, and so did almost every major Democratic leader I know. I can't think of one who did not. I never heard Joe Biden say that he supported looting and rioting, and I don't really remember one major Democratic leader. I mean, was there a voice out there that may have said that? Yeah, I mean, but I'm not assigning Matt Gaetz to you.
You almost tried to before.
No, I didn't. No, I was asking you about what was going on there. I mean, so, you know, and the way I read this, and by the way, homicides were up in 2020 by 30% in this country. You know, should we say this was the function of Republican influence and President Trump's leadership? I mean, you went on in this chapter, by the way, to talk about what you did, which is incredibly laudable in Camden, New Jersey, which is a model in certain ways for how to approach policing. You disbanded the police department and you rebuilt it around a different model, which is a lot of what police reformers are talking about now. So I'm not asking you, well, here's what I'm asking you.
Okay.
Aren't you, as someone who aspires to be potentially a candidate for president, aren't you under some pressure as well to just throw enough red meat to the base that they can, you know, they can feel like, well, he's kind of one of us? Because this is red meat language, and it's not really, you know, it doesn't really hold up.
Well, a couple of things. You're always under pressure, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, to throw red meat to your base. So am I under that pressure? Of course I am. And any political candidate who says they're not, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, is just not telling the truth. Second, I do believe what I said in there because I heard many Democrats rationalize the violence. And to me, a rationalization of that violence is an implicit support of it. And, like, you need to understand how frustrated and angry these people are.
There may have been people saying that, but I didn't hear Biden say it.
Well, what I said about Biden is, look, when you're the president or the candidate at that time, the nominee of the party, I think he could have been much stronger in speaking out against what was going on, and he chose not to. And that's the other way you throw red meat. It's not only about what you say, it's by what you refuse to say.
Yeah, I mean,
and I know we disagree on this, but the feeling that I had in watching Portland and watching Seattle and watching Wisconsin, New York City, with Bill de Blasio there, basically allowing the city to become a war zone, and instead blaming the police. Well, of course, when you blame the police for that, and believe me, there have been police abuses that need to be done, and that's why we did some of the changes we did that I talked about in Camden. But when you blame the police, you demoralize the police, and the police go, good, okay, you don't want us to do that? We'll take 4 steps back. And there's a result from that. You empower, to me, people who want to do bad acts in your city, in your state. So, and I know we have fundamental disagreement on this one, but to me, I think that silence is acquiescence to some of this.
If Biden were silent, I'd agree. I mean, he was very clear about what he felt, and he was very clear about what he felt about police as well. I mean, I had sort of the same feeling about the section on education. You had a well-known running battle with teachers' unions in your state, and you know that's one thing. But do you really think that critical race theory is being taught throughout schools here? I mean,
critical race theory is now being used as an umbrella phrase for...
Well, you used it, that's why I raised it.
And I'm explaining that.
Okay.
It's now being used as an umbrella phrase for certain types of liberal agenda items that are being, in my view, pushed in the schools. I don't believe that any child should be taught that one of the determining factors of how you treat someone sitting next to you is their race. And that's clearly being taught in our schools now. You can call that whatever you want. I don't know if that's critical race theory. I don't know what it is, but to me, it's just wrong.
Yeah.
And you know,
I guess I would argue that what we really want to teach children is not to treat people differently because of their race. Isn't that really kind of the crux of this, that for a long time people were being treated differently?
no question. And I think, and I don't think and I thought Condoleezza Rice put this very well. She was asked this, I think, on The View, for God's sake. So actually something smart
They got
came
good
out
numbers.
of The
You
View.
got to get on there, man.
I've already been on there. Are you kidding? I was there on Monday. I don't mess around. They sell books. But she said there, and to understand Condoleezza Rice, just briefly, is that she is a daughter of Alabama, raised in a segregated school system. And
Friends with the kids who got killed in the church
bombings. And, you know, she said, look, I don't think that we improve anything in our country by making white children today feel guilty about the sins of ancestors they had nothing to do with and never knew. And I don't think that empowers black children, and I don't think it empowers white children, and we should be for empowering all of them. And yes, I have had a long-running feud with the teachers union, yeah. and I think that what's happened in Virginia and what's happening in the country right now is that parents, for the first time because of the pandemic, are becoming really clued into what their children are being taught in the classroom. They didn't know before. Most families these days are two-family income households or 3 jobs or 4 jobs to support their families. They don't know specifically what their children are being taught every day. Even involved parents don't necessarily know. Then all of a sudden the pandemic happened and they were sitting there and hearing it. And I think for a lot of parents in this country, it was disturbing. I'll give you one quick example, a personal one.
You wrote about it.
Right,
Niece.
my niece. And my niece...
I just want to show you I read the book.
See, that a boy, David. I can see he has notes in the book, too. It's really impressive.
I can't believe he said this.
Yeah, he really is a professor. Is she crazy? But she's a 5th grader. Her class was given an assignment to write an essay, The American Dream, Myth or Reality. And they said also, though, for the assignment, you must write your essay based upon the written materials we give you. And then they gave them written materials that only supported myth. So you'll be shocked to know that my niece went home and wrote An American Dream is a Reality essay and turned it in anyway. And she got a C. And so my brother and my sister-in-law were concerned about, this niece is a very good student and very, very meticulous about her work, unlike some of her brothers. And so they went in to ask. And they said, well, she didn't write it based on the assignment. He said, well, you didn't give her anything that supported reality. And well, that was the assignment. What is that? To me,
look,
that's
first
pushing
of all, I
an
don't
agenda.
know. I can't even speak to that. I mean, I can make an argument about economic mobility in this country because I think we ought to try and do better. It's harder for, a person in the lowest quadrant has like a 7% chance to move up to the top. That's not what we want in this country, and we do less well than many other industrialized countries in that regard. But I mean, 5th grade, and I don't know what was going on there. Here's what I would say. Terry McAuliffe said, I think, I don't know what he meant, but the way it came out was that, no parents shouldn't be involved in the education of their kids. That's nonsense. Of course parents should be involved in the education of their kids. You know who shouldn't be involved in the education of their kids? Politicians.
Well, I don't disagree with that.
Politicians. You have a legislator, a powerful legislator down in Texas with a list of 820 books that he wants to proscribe.
Well, to me, that's ridiculous, right? So I got asked this on an earlier show I was doing today. I'm not a book banner. Like, my view is you learn something from every book you read, even really bad ones. You learn something. And we should be exposing children in this country and young people in this country to more of that, not less. But what the teacher needs to be, in my view, or the professor in college, is the tour guide for that, for younger children, make them understand when they read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, that there's language in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer that we would never think to use today, but that back then was appropriate and accepted. That's where we need to guide people. But should you ban The Adventures of Tom? No, absolutely not. Nor, on the other hand, should you ban Beloved, right? So I think that stuff, I'm 100% with you on that. I am not a book banner. I want people to read as much as they can, and I want them to develop a critical mind so they can decide whether they think something's objectionable or not.
Let me ask you, one of the most moving parts of this book, and I know one of your daughters, Sarah, is here. Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, okay. I realized we just had a talk about this, and here I went and outed her. I'm sorry. But I think this relates to you. You wrote very movingly about your own battle with COVID. And we know last fall you spent 7 days in the intensive care unit. I'm pretty sure that as you were lying there, you weren't thinking, damn, I'm not going to get another chance to run for president.
No.
But tell me what you were thinking and talk about that. And you talk about one piece of it when you thought you were going to be intubated. So
yeah.
Talk about
Well, look, I think you go into the intensive care unit for COVID, and it is incredibly frightening because you are isolated. The nurses don't even come in but for twice a day. Your IVs are outside the room. They can change them outside the room so they don't have to come in and be exposed to you. When you have to sign a consent form, you sign it and they don't take it back because you touched it. You hold it up to the window and they take a picture of it. And you can't get visitors. You are so sick that you don't really feel like reading or even watching television. So you're very much in your own mind. And as the first couple of days were going, and they weren't going well, I was getting worse, not better. I had a conversation with my wife on the phone with her checking in on me, and I said, look, conversation I have to have with you, if they are gonna intubate me, you need to tell them that they need to give me a little notice because I wanna talk to each of the kids because I may not come out of it. And there's things that I wanna say to them if it doesn't work out. And that's an awfully difficult conversation to have and to think about. And you think about it by yourself. And what I was thinking about in those times, David, was the things that I wouldn't get to do for them. Mm-hmm. As a father, I think, and I know you relate to this, that you feel like a guider and a protector of your children. And that the hard-earned lessons you've gotten, you want to make it a little easier for them. And the way you can do that is when you see a situation coming their way, you say, oh, I've been there, and I screwed that up, so don't do it. Here's the way you should try to do this. And I was thinking to myself laying there, I may not get the chance to do that. That's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about, my daughters. Who's going to walk them down the aisle if I'm not there? Who's going to guide my sons on what it means to be a man and how to treat their wives and how to be a father? Those are the things you're thinking about when you're laying there. And that's an intense emotional time. And actually, one of the only people I spoke to about that beside Mary Pat, and it was just coincidentally someone I think you know, Greg Brown, who is the CEO of Motorola Solutions here in Chicago, and a good friend of mine, a Jersey guy who I've known for a long time. And he called me to check in on me one night when I was in the midst of one of these.
Despair.
Yeah, I was. And I started crying to Greg. And that's when you need a friend. And he was like, are you kidding me? There is no chance you're gonna give into this. There is no chance. I know you too well. You're too strong. You're too tough. You're gonna overcome this. Now, he had no idea whether I was or I wasn't, but that's exactly what I needed to hear at that moment.
Yeah.
And, so I think when people look back years from now on this phase of our country's history, I think the psychological impact that all of this has had on so many people is going to be something that we won't really truly
think we have our arms
understand.
around it.
No, we don't. And when you see today, I saw on the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, in an issue that I really care a lot about, opioid addiction, that we now had 100,000 deaths in a year from April to April in this country. And there's no question in my mind that number is going to go higher before it goes lower, and that the pandemic had a lot to do with that. Less mental health care, less drug treatment, and greater anxiety and isolation and loneliness. And I think we have a lot of people think wrongly, I believe, that when we get past wearing all these masks and everybody is back to some sense of normalcy on COVID, that we'll be back to normal. I think that's just when the first layer, the fog of war goes away and we see the real casualties that are left. Right now, we've just seen the most acute casualties, the people who have died from COVID and their families. But we're going to see the background. And so, you know, we have a lot to work on that. And for me, when I was laying there, I wasn't thinking about that stuff. I was thinking about the most basic part of my obligation as a father and what I missed.
Did it change you at all? I mean, did you think differently when you came out of there?
Yeah, I definitely did. In the sense that I was always close and connected to my children, but I'm even more close and more connected to them now. I call them more. I'll just FaceTime them out of nowhere, as Sarah will know.
We have a witness here.
Yeah.
She's nodding yes.
You know, because what COVID did more than anything else to us as a society, and it did it to us as families, was a lack of connection.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and I also had two people in our relatively immediate family, first cousin, who died from COVID. She and her husband. She got it, she gave it to him. No underlying medical conditions. They were 60 and 61 years old. He was a longshoreman, still actively working on loading ships, a very physical job, and he was in great shape. She died from organ failure. He died from a stroke when a blood clot went to his brain. It's random, and it was a very emotional thing for us. So the way I think it's changed me is that I think every day about making sure that I say what I want to say to my kids when I think of it, and don't put it off. That is incredibly annoying to them.
Yeah.
At moments, no question.
She's nodding again.
Incredibly annoying to them at certain moments. I think they're saying to themselves. In fact, I texted the four of them together the other night because I was with some people at dinner and they asked me, you know, what do you do that annoys your children? And I told them I'm FaceTiming them too much lately. I think that annoys them. And I said, what phrase do I use that you guys make fun of me behind my back? The answer was, not behind your back. We make fun of you to your face about it. And they all came with a phrase or two that I use that have become that. So I'd much rather have those connections now. And you know, in our business, you can become very detached from your family because you're so
you
ambitious.
Convince yourself that what you're doing is so important that you just have to,
And I don't, if I ever were to run for president again, I really believe that after going through what I went through, that I won't be as detached as I was when I ran the first time.
Yeah. Okay, you heard it here, Sarah. So on the subject, I mean, I don't want to pick over what's been picked over in a million media interviews about the fact. I mean, it seems likely that you got this from the president. You don't know. Mm-hmm. He called and want to make sure that you didn't blame him for it. But I want to ask you about his larger role in the whole saga of COVID, and let's stipulate that the vaccines and the Operation Warp Speed was a singular achievement and obviously saved a lot of lives. But you're very explicit in this book. You wanted to lead this effort to fight COVID, and ultimately he chose the vice president instead. And you were pretty explicit about your disappointments and how he handled it. You said too little, too late, too much denial, not enough fact-facing, too sunny, too disconnected from the frightening realities of people's everyday lives. Trump's refusal to wear a face mask made him look stubborn. None of his actions gave the Americans the confidence they craved in a crisis, that their president was doing everything he could. Do you think that had things have been done differently, if he had taken it more seriously sooner, if he had communicated a consistent message on wearing a mask, if he had done a number of things that you recommended to him, would a lot of lives have been saved?
I mean, hard for me to tell, but I suspect so. You know, I'm not a doctor, and I try not to pretend that I am, but it just seems to be logical to me that it would have. And I think, you know, his wife was very plugged into this, and I write about that in the book too, that she's the one who called me and said to me, you know, in March of 2020, said, you need to come down here and talk to him because you get this stuff, and he knows you get it, and I want you to talk to him about it. And I said, well, I just don't invite myself down there. She goes, don't worry, you'll get an invitation. And then about 2 hours later, he called and said, I want you to come down right now. And we had like an hour and 45-minute conversation in the Oval Office about this, predominantly just the two of us. The vice president wandered in once and wandered out. We had a fundamental disagreement about how to deal with this stuff. He wanted to be perpetually optimistic and say it's going to go away, it's going to be okay. And my approach to him was that no one believes that. And so when you say that, you're not encouraging other people to be optimistic. You're making people think that you're out of touch. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing that a leader can be in a crisis is out of touch.
What about those 5 weeks when he took the podium in those briefings and offered some unusual remedies?
I have to admit that I am partly responsible for that. But it didn't play the way I suggested it would.
You're not a Lysol guy.
No. What I said to him was, you should go out and speak at the beginning of those press conferences, give a brief 5 to 10 minute update on the latest that's going on, take 1 or 2 questions, and then leave and hand it off to the vice president. I think that people want to see the leader. And I think we saw this with Andrew Cuomo in New York. He was doing it every day and in a very kind of factual, methodical way. And I think Andrew did a very good job on that. And people in New York, as a result, felt much more confident that the government was in charge and that it was going to get better, but that they weren't underselling it. Of course, then the president took half of my advice. He went out and led the press conferences, but went on for an hour.
Yeah,
So
they were sort of...
They were rambling, diatribes on things, put people on the spot, took 15 or 18 questions, and to me, it was counter to what I was advising. What I was advising was be a presence as the president. Let them hear you, answer a couple of questions, then hand it off to the experts and let them talk. He only took like a third of that advice.
So you, in your book, as I mentioned earlier, you took on some of these conspiracy theories. You took on birtherism. You took on QAnon. You took on the election fraud disaster. And on that, you said it wasn't what the president said on January 6th that made him culpable. It was everything he said leading up to the election.
Yes.
So I guess my question to you is, you talked about how he handled the crisis that is a seminal crisis in American history now, 770,000 people dead. You've talked about his role in being a purveyor of conspiracy theories. You said we need to renounce the conspiracy theorists and truth deniers, the ones who know better and the ones who are just plain nuts. And yet, you enthusiastically fought for him in the election. And I'm sure you'll say, well, we got conservative judges, we got tax cuts, and so on. Where's the red line for you? I mean,
The red line was
you called the January 6th the worst day in modern...
The red line was election night, David. The red line to me
But
was
if you saw
election
it
night.
coming, if you saw him calling the election, pre-budding the election and calling it fraudulent going in...
I didn't think he'd actually do it when the moment came. I thought he was doing that. It's kind of like, you've had candidates before who, like, before elections will say, I know I'm going to lose, I know I'm going to lose. It's a self-protective measure. And I know I did that in 2009.
My candidates generally kept it in the bubble box.
Well, that's one of the things that makes Donald Trump completely different. I wasn't out there saying, I know I'm going to lose. I just used to say it to Mary Pat. But I didn't think he would do it. To me, It was sitting there at 2:30 in the morning in the studios at ABC, see him come out for the speech in the East Room of the White House, standing behind the seal of the president and saying the election was stolen, and then offering not one piece of evidence to support that. And I was sitting there with George Stephanopoulos. The president was still talking. And I said to George, as soon as he stops, you come to me first. And he said, what are you going to say? I said, don't worry about it. Just come to me first. And he said, okay. And so he said, Christie, you know President Trump better than anybody. What do you think? And I said, that's completely awful and unacceptable. And as a prosecutor, that's like me going to a grand jury and saying, return this indictment on Axelrod. Now, I'll present evidence to you later, but just take my word for it now, he's guilty. We would never think to do something like that. And that's not nearly as important as a national election for President of the United States. So I say in the book I was sick to my stomach. I was. I spoke to his son that night, who called me after I said that to give me a hard time. And I said to him, like, you guys have some evidence, you better show it. And I said, by the way, if you have evidence that the election was stolen that's convincing, I'll fight with you. But you got to show the evidence before you say it was stolen. And I had that conversation with the president 4 or 5 times between Election Day and Christmas. And, you know, he would try to bulldoze me like he bulldozed everybody else, and he couldn't. I just kept saying to him, where's the evidence? I'm a prosecutor, where's the evidence? He'd say these things that weren't evidence. So that's the red line for me, David. Like, I don't, you can't undercut our democracy with no facts. And that's why we haven't spoken since a couple of days before Christmas of last year.
You helped prepare him for debates. What are the odds that you'll be debating him in a couple of years? And how much would you enjoy that?
Well, I enjoy debating anybody.
I know. I know.
I enjoy debating anybody. So if I run, if you're asking, will it be somehow better or more enjoyable if he's on the stage? I don't really care. I really don't. If I decide to run for president, I quite frankly don't care who the hell else is up on the stage. It's going to be my job to make myself the most attractive, appealing candidate. And that's what you do every time you go up there. But if he turns out to be there, this much I'll guarantee you. If he turns out to be there and I'm there, he'll know I'm there.
I'm sure of that. Christie, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, David.
Maybe we should do this as an insert.
Yeah.
President Trump endorsed Representative Gosar today, one day after his House censure for, as you know, an animated illustration of him murdering AOC and attacking the president.
Not surprising.
Yeah.
Look, he's engaged right now in vendetta politics. You know, when Adam Kinzinger said he wasn't going to run, you know, he said 2 down, 8 to go. You know, that's what he's into right now. And it's not only bad for the party and the country, but what he doesn't yet realize is it's bad for him. It's bad for him. And he shouldn't be doing it. As his friend, I would tell him he shouldn't be doing it. Because whatever legacy he has as president, Operation Warp Speed, the economic performance, the other things that the conservative judges, the things that we as Republicans would say were good things. Every time he does stuff like this, it diminishes that, in my view.
Well, as your friend, I'm not sure that he's your friend anymore, so
Yeah, it may not be.
yeah. All right. Let's take some questions here in the center aisle. Just line up there.
Hi, my name is Juliana. I'm a 4th year in the college, and I'm a political science major from Los Angeles. You touched on this very briefly, but my question surrounds January 6th. And as you know, there was an insurrection at the Capitol, but Trump actually refused initially to condemn the insurrectionists, and a lot of congressmen, congresswomen have denied that it was actually an insurrection. So do you blame Donald Trump for the election, and or the insurrection, and how do you see his role in it, and how do we go forward to prevent another January 6th?
Well, I write in the book that, and David alluded to this in his question, that, you know, I think people who say that his speech on January 6th caused the riot are missing the point. I've listened. I didn't listen to it that day, but I've listened to it in the aftermath. I think January 6th was a rather unspectacular speech. It was what he did every day from Election Day to January 6th. Those people came to that rally angry, feeling cheated, feeling the election had been stolen from them. That's the anger that caused that insurrection. It wasn't his speech or Rudy's speech or Don Jr.'s speech. It's not even the icing on the cake. I mean, maybe that's the cherry on top of the sundae if we're going to torture the analogy. But no, and I've said that he is culpable because of what he said. Now, how do we prevent that in the future? You don't do that stuff. You don't say the election's stolen when it wasn't. You don't put yourself ahead of the interests of the country. Look, I think the example of this, and this is the example I suggested to him a couple of days after the election. I said, be Al Gore. Al Gore fought like a dog for 34 days in every courtroom he possibly could to get the election to go his way. He used the Florida state courts. He participated in stuff the federal courts that the Bush campaign had started. And he fought as hard as he could. But when the United States Supreme Court said, it's over, that next day, Al Gore stood up in front of the cameras and said, it's over. It's painful, but it's over. Now, there were still many Democrats who didn't accept that. I was at the inaugural George W. Bush, and in fact, a woman right in front of me, I was in the second section in the front row, and this woman came walking as Bush came up to take the oath. And she was in a tan trench coat. And she dropped the trench coat and she was completely naked. And painted across her chest was, he stole it. I had very mixed feelings about that, David, I have to tell you the truth.
I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, true story, right? So this idea that Republicans invented this kind of discontent isn't true, but the difference was that the leader of the Democratic Party at that time, Al Gore, fought, but then conceded. And that's what I argued to the president he should have done.
Well.
Look, I don't agree with you, but fight as hard as you want in the courts. But when the courts say it's done, then it's got to be done. And I think that's the way you prevent it in the future. And one last note on January 6th. I don't believe that January 6th showed the fragility of our democracy. I think January 6th showed the resilience of our democracy. Because the men and women in Congress who had been threatened with violence, and violence in the future, depending on how they voted, they came back at 4 a.m. and they voted to certify the election. They didn't go into hiding. They didn't go into safe houses. They didn't wait a week. They did it that night. And I think that's a resilient democracy. And so to me, while January 6th is a deplorable day and an awful moment for our country, there also was a bright moment, and that bright moment happened at 4 a.m. on January 7th when they voted to certify the election.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam Zabner. I'm a fourth-year neuroscience major from Iowa City, Iowa. You correctly predicted a lot of the issues that happened in the Trump presidency as a candidate. I'm wondering, on the day that you endorsed Donald Trump, whether you thought he had the capacity to lead the country through a national security threat like COVID-19.
Well, I never thought about COVID-19. No, look, what I thought when I endorsed Donald Trump in February of 2016 was that he was going to be the Republican nominee for president. And that I had known him for 15 years, and that I thought I had an opportunity to make him a better candidate, and if he won, a better president. And I felt like that was my obligation to do it. So I did. And so it was not any more complicated than that. I did not go through the analysis of whether I thought he was going to be able to lead us through a national security crisis like COVID-19, because no one even knew what the hell COVID-19 was. But I knew he was going to be the Republican nominee, and a lot of people didn't believe that at that time. But when you barely lose Iowa, you win New Hampshire by 2-1, and you then win South Carolina by double digits, I don't care who you are, you're the nominee. And so my question in my mind had to be, do I sit on the sidelines or do I get in the game? And I decided to get in the game and got criticized a lot for it at the time. But I do think I made him a better candidate than he would have been otherwise. And I do think I made him a better president than he would have been otherwise.
You said he crossed a red line on election night. Is that red line permanent? I mean, could you look people in the eye, given everything you wrote in this book and what you've said tonight, and can you not say that because you can't be the Republican nominee if you say you won't support someone who will?
No, I think, look, I think that would be really problematic for sure if you do that. But I also would say to you that I always believe in second chances for people. And if he were to, I don't know that he would, but if he did come to the point where he stepped forward and said, I was wrong, I was emotional, I was horribly scarred by the election loss, and I did things that I shouldn't have done, I'll never do it again, I'd listen.
Yeah.
I'd listen, because I think everybody deserves redemption.
You're not endorsing him.
Well,
He's not going to do that.
You could take whatever you want, but I'm not going to say that because that's what everybody wants.
No, I understand.
That's what everybody wants the headline to be.
No, I understand.
But everyone has a chance at redemption.
I'm infringing on their time now.
Everyone has a chance at redemption.
Go ahead.
Give everybody a chance. Even you, David.
Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm a third year in the college studying public policy. And I want to go back in time a little bit to 2010 when,
Okay.
with Mark Zuckerberg's support, you tried to revamp the Newark public school system with $100 million from Zuckerberg. And it went up in flames. The superintendent she fled in fear of her life, and pastors said that they feared civil unrest. And so I'm curious what you think went wrong.
Are you from New Jersey?
No, I'm not.
No, you
but
just read that book.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, the book's a pile of bullshit. So let's start with that. And, the $100 million could have been spent better than it was, but it didn't go up in flames. In fact, after the $100 million was spent, I negotiated a deal with the American Federation of Teachers for the first time in New Jersey for those teachers in Newark to be paid based on merit pay. We opened more charter schools, in part because of that $100 million. And the test scores in Newark are now 3 times better than they were in 2010. 3 times better than they were in 2010. The black pastors in Newark, in the main, are upset. You know why they're upset? Because there's not more charter schools and that they're not vouchers. Because they want all of their congregants to have an opportunity to get a great education that's not based upon where they live in Newark, but is based upon the ability of that child. And Mark and Priscilla did a great thing by donating that $100 million. And do I think that the Newark School Board could have administered it better? Shockingly, yes. But in the end, what it was a catalyst for was the teachers union finally had to give in on merit pay for teachers. And you know why they did? Because we used part of that $100 million to buy out the teachers that they had, and we're talking about upwards of 60 teachers that we were on the full-time payroll that were in something that was called the rubber room. They went to work every day, not in a classroom, but they went to the central office and sat in a room and read newspapers. But they couldn't be fired because of the civil service rules. We used that money to get those teachers off the payroll. Bless you.
Thank you.
To get those teachers off the payroll, and then to have those teachers be substituted in with new teachers who were paid under a merit pay system. So, that book was written by somebody who has a pro-teachers union agenda. Mark has said the book is wrong. The superintendent did not leave in fear of her life. Tammy Anderson served for years after the $100 million. And was Tammy's life threatened? Yes. You know whose Tammy's life was threatened by? By teachers. Not by the public, by teachers. And Tammy ultimately left because her husband got a better job someplace else, and she moved and became an education leader in another part of the country. So you got to be careful. Some books have an agenda. I was there. I lived it. I'm proud of it. And the proof of the pudding is to repeat to you again. In 2021, the test scores on reading and math for students in the public schools in Newark are 3 times better than they were when I got elected governor.
Thanks, Sophie.
Sure.
I think you got his attention.
That issue gets me fired up.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ben, a first-year econ major. I was wondering, given your personal experiences with COVID, given the value you've always placed on public health, and your denouncement of various conspiracy theories, what is your opinion of the vaccine mandate? You might be interested to know that yesterday Mark Short was hosted by the IOP, and he very strongly disapproved of it.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of vaccine mandate, and the reason I'm not is because I think we should be going for education, not indoctrination. The people who today are not being vaccinated are now in a situation where they have to choose between their job and doing something that they legitimately think may harm them. My children have friends who believe that the vaccine may affect their fertility. I haven't seen the science for that, but they believe it. And I don't believe we have enough science for me to look across them and say, there is absolutely no chance this is going to affect your fertility. So if I can't do that, then I shouldn't mandate them, and I certainly shouldn't have them cost their jobs. So what we need to do, what the Trump administration did a bad job of, and I think the Biden administration has done a bad job of, is educating the public about the relative risks and benefits of the vaccine. And with all that, we still have 70% of people age 12 and above who are now vaccinated. So I think mandates was a hammer that didn't need to be swung, and I think it's just going to further divide the country. And I don't think it's going to bring the public health benefits that people think it will, because I think people will evade the mandate. And then how are you going to enforce it? And who are you going to put people in jail for it, beside having them lose their jobs? I just think you shouldn't draw a red line that you're not going to enforce, or that you are unable to enforce. And I think vaccine mandates is one of those that's just a step too far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Governor. My name is Ibrahim Rashid. I'm a Master's in Public Policy candidate here at Harris School. I really resonated with what you were talking, your own experience with COVID. I myself had like 2 ER visits and had a lot of the same thoughts that you went through and lost family. So the feelings that you went through, as well as thinking through like how do we emerge out of it, really stuck with me. I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether you have been thinking about long haul COVID and how to support people who, after they contract the virus, just never recover. Some CDC estimates say that anywhere between 10 to 30% of people who get the virus will have lingering symptoms up to a year. I myself was 23, no pre-existing conditions, had a heart condition, brain fog, lost my ability to walk, and all sorts of fun things I went through. So really just wanted to get your thoughts as a public official. Have you been thinking about long-haul COVID, and what can we do about it?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, look, I don't think we understand enough about it yet to really be able to write a public health prescription on how to deal with it. I think that the CDC and our private and public health companies around the country need to be monitoring it very closely, monitoring people who have symptoms of long-haul COVID, and figure out what we can do and what ways, what kind of support they need, what kind of help they need to make their lives of the best quality that they possibly can be. It's one of the mysteries of this that we still don't have a handle on, and we can't have a handle on it. It's, we're not quite 2 years into it yet, so the idea of how to evaluate the long-haul stuff, I think, is significantly more difficult, except to say that we know that in many people this problem exists, and so we're going to have to learn from a public health perspective how to deal with it, and how to provide them with the support and the assistance they need to recover to the fullest that they possibly can.
Thank you. You don't have any residual?
I don't, fortunately. I had 2 things, David. I had fatigue for about 2 months, and then I recovered from that. The oddest thing was I had the weirdest dreams you ever would have, and the most vivid weird dreams, which doctors told me is one of the potential aftermaths of it. And the weirdest one.
I was hoping we could get the next question before you got into your dreams.
The weirdest one was I was spacewalking, David. Now, if there is a less likely astronaut than me, I haven't met them. But I was actually spacewalking, and when I woke up, I felt like I really had been. So I'm glad that's over too. No more spacewalking for me.
Good. I bet you
David didn't know what to
Bezos
do with
has a
that.
seat for you. But go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a mic, so I'll just speak louder. But Joe Kumar, I'm a second year Chicago
Thank you.
Just had a question. So looking back on your time as governor, ending with a low approval rate, is there anything that you think you would have done differently, or any action you would have not done that you might change in the way you govern?
Well, it says on the clock here I got 11 seconds. But look, I think if anybody who has a position like governor or president or mayor, an executive position in government, and serves for any period of time, and they tell you, no, there's nothing I would do differently, they're clearly not telling you the truth. Look, we'll start off with, I would have never hired Bill Baroni, Bridget Kelly, or David Wildstein.
From the bridge
From the bridge stuff. Now, I didn't hire any of them except for Bridget directly, but they all kind of were in my orbit. I had 60,000 employees. I would have probably, now knowing what I know now, would have stopped that from happening. I wouldn't have gone on the beach that day.
Yeah.
The government was closed. I was going to the legislature to try to negotiate a budget. My children had friends who they invited to the beach house for that weekend, our 4th of July weekend, our last time in the governor's beach house. So I told them leading up to when they were going to close the government down, if you close the government down, I'm still going to the beach house. And we just won't have any services there, but I'm going. The mistake I made was going out there myself. I should have let them all go out. I went out there for a half an hour, and it was a mistake. So, that's an easy one to go, nah, the half hour on the beach wasn't that great anyway, and I probably just should have stayed inside the house, and it would have saved me from like about 10,000 memes. And from a policy perspective, one of the things I would have done differently was I had an opportunity to limit how much of public employees' sick pay they could cash out. This is different than vacation pay, which you can cash out, but sick pay that you didn't use in New Jersey, you could cash out an unlimited amount. What that leads to is that no one's ever sick. They use their vacation days sometimes. Sometimes they just don't show up and they don't charge a sick day. And you would have mostly police officers, firefighters, who would leave with what they called, not me, they called boat checks, $250,000 to $300,000 checks on departure for unused sick days. I used to think that, like, if you didn't use your sick days, your benefit was you weren't sick. Congratulations. And if you were sick, you were going to get paid for it. And I had a chance to make a deal to cap that at $15,000. That the most you could take was 15. I wanted 0. The legislature, I fought with them about it for months. They passed the bill and put it on my desk at 15,000, and I vetoed it. And then they never gave me another bill again. So to this day, you can still cash in unlimited sick pay. It just was stupid. It was one of the few times that I didn't take a compromise when I was governor with the Democratic legislature. And when I got near the end of my term and realized I was never going to get another shot to do it, it's a smaller issue, but it's emblematic of what I tried to do when I was governor, which was put touchdowns in the end zone. Don't always look for a full win, because you're not going to get it. It's divided government. The people decided on divided government. And what they want me to do as governor is do the very best I can to get the best deal I can get, but get a deal. And that's what we're missing in Washington right now, even inside our own parties. The Democrats fighting over. I mean, just think about this. If I had told David Axelrod when he was in the White House, guess what? You can have $1.75 trillion in social spending. The Obama administration would have jumped at that in 5 seconds to take that deal. They got criticized for doing an $800 billion recovery program that by Republicans, it was too big. Some Democrats were saying too small, but not many at that time. The Democrats are fighting with each other over $1.75 trillion. Like, I can't even believe it. Like, take the money and run if you're a Democrat right now. This is a huge expansion of social programs that they could never have gotten before this, yet they're fighting. So Even inside our party's fighting over the stuff we talked about. Democrats are fighting over that. Forget about bringing Democrats and Republicans together. We should try to bring Republicans and Republicans together, and Democrats together. And then once we do that, we might be able to do the other. So that was a mistake on my part, and I wish I'd followed the formula that I'd followed for most of my governorship, because there would have been better public policy because of it. If I had another 20 minutes, I'd give you another 5 things I would have done differently, because you're never perfect in these jobs. What you are is the best you can be at that moment. And the way to be the best you can be is to have certain guiding principles that you try to always follow. And for me, from a governing perspective, it was put touchdowns in the end zone. And whenever I would forget about that, I had 3 good chiefs of staff in 8 years who heard me say that, and when I was being stubborn, they would come into the office and say, "We're on the 2-yard line. Why are we punting?" And you got to always remember that, and I wish more people in Washington would remember that. We might get more stuff done.
Thank you for your question. Governor, your spaceship is waiting outside, so we have to get you going here.
Thank you.
I know you're headed out to the West Coast, but
We are.
thanks for spending time with us.
David, it's my pleasure. Thanks.